Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at MikeMalatesta.com. Today, I'm fulfilling my promise to you with another amazing success story. E.A. Csolkovits joins me on the podcast. E.A. is the founder of Givers University. He started his career as a janitor and got his first big break when he cleaned the house of June Martino, when she was the secretary for Ray Kroc, the McDonald's founder. E.A. went on to become a big success in the diamond business, and he's got a unique perspective on people, categorizing them as either givers, takers, or fakers. I thought long and hard about putting this episode out because after I had this, which was a really great conversation with EA, I learned something about him that gave me a little bit of pause. I learned that he had been in some significant trouble that he resolved, but we didn't get a chance to talk about it on the podcast, and I felt like we maybe missed something as a result. I do hope to get him back on to talk about that because I think it would weigh as very important in the whole story that he describes to you in what you're just about to hear. So, that said, here we go with E.A. Csolkovits. Hi, E.A. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mike, for having me on your great podcast. And what could be a better name for a podcast than How Did It Happen? When I first saw that, I thought, I'm going to love this guy. This is just great because he just said, how'd that happen? It's a great question.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you. I'm so glad that you reached out to me. I think you contacted me on Podmatch, which is a platform for podcasters and people who want to be on podcasts. And I joined up with that maybe a month or so ago, maybe a little bit longer. I haven't had a ton of people reach out to me, but the people that I've had, I've been so impressed with. Like this, so EA reaches out to me and I'm like, oh, why don't you just send me something about you? And he sends me something about him. And you will learn as we go through today that this guy is, he's something else. He is a very, very accomplished human being. And we're going to explore that story today. So anyway, thank you, EA, for reaching out to me. Before I go any further, I should ask you, which I never do this, but I'm going to ask you a question before I ask you the question. Is that okay with you?
As long as I give an answer before I give my answer.
Okay. I'll leave that in your hands. So the question is, what does EA stand for?
It's actually my first and middle initial.
Okay.
So it just makes it real simple, because, last name being Csolkovits. And when people see it, because there's a C on it, it throws them for a loop to begin with and they stare at it. I've even had people try to correct me on saying my own last name. They say, no, you don't say it that way.
Oh, is that right?
It's my name. I know how to say it. But so EA just became an easy, simple way. And it's a little bit different too. So it became a sort of a moniker, if you will, as people reference it. So I'm 1,000% good with it, and I'm certainly known that way.
Okay. I've always been fascinated by people who go by initials. It's sometimes it's a family thing. Sometimes it's a shortcut thing or a abbreviation thing because you have a difficult name or whatever. And sometimes it's something you get in high school when, you're on a team or something. They just start calling you something, and then that just sticks with you the rest of your life.
Well, and I'm glad it ended up being EA because until I was 12 years old, I thought my name was Go Chop Wood.
Okay.
It goes okay.
All right, so let's get this thing started, EA. So I ask everyone the same question to get started. It's a simple one. How did it happen for you?
Well, I have to say it's a story leading to story leading to story, and I can share with you from the very beginning and really, the interesting events that I really had in my life that really blessed me in so many ways. And sometimes when they didn't seem they were blessing me, as I look in retrospect, they were huge blessings. I was born in Chicago, and my father was a milkman. And back when I was 5 years old, I'm 65 now. When I was 5 years old, my father, had a distributorship for Twin Oaks Dairy, and it was just, one man operation delivering milk. And I don't know, Mike, I remember as a child, they had these boxes outside the house, and that was the milkman's box, right? And the milk went in there, and the homeowner put the piece of paper, scratch what they wanted, and what was funny, Mike? There was money in the box all the time, and no one ever touched it.
Yeah.
Everyone knew that was milkman money, right? And milk came in glass gallon jugs back then, and so at 5 years old, I'd help my father here and there. And then as I got a little bit older, I took my first big step into becoming successful. And Mike, I became a janitor. That was my first big step. Now, I didn't mind doing that, by the way, because business was always picking up.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's like a waste business. That's like a waste business joke. I get that. That's where I have my career in the waste business. So yeah, we got it's so janitors, waste guys. We have the same thing. I get. Yeah. Funny.
That's right. That's right. Your mother and my mother, they were both mothers.
Yeah.
I mean, this is perfect. Yeah. We went to different schools together. It couldn't get better than this. So so here I was now I'm a janitor. And I will say this, Mike, 2 real interesting events happened while I was a janitor. The first was at the ripe old age of 16, I was able to be bonded, which means insured, and I could go in expensive places and clean them in case my buffer hit something and hurt it or destroyed it. Insurance company would take care of it. So I was able to clean the home of a lady. Her name was June Martino, and I was there every Wednesday cleaning her house. Now, you may not know who June Martino is unless you've seen this movie. Did you see the movie with Michael Keaton about McDonald's called The Founder? It was out for some time, and it's available on streaming. And basically it's the McDonald's story, if you will. And Michael Keaton plays Ray Kroc.
Okay.
And it's very Hollywoodized, and I lived in that area. I lived in Oak Brook area, which is where the McDonald's world headquarters was. So in my lifetime, I watched and literally lived that whole phenomenon. I was right there. So it was very Hollywoodized, but that's how the way Hollywood is. But it was based on certain events. So I was in cleaning June's house, and in the movie, by the way, for your listeners that may have seen the movie, again, it's called The Founder. When you see Michael Keaton, Ray Kroc, talking to a lady outside his office all the time, he says, June, 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 June. That's the lady whose house I cleaned. That was her. And that was June Martino.
So she's Ray Kroc's assistant or an executive?
She's secretary. She worked for him before Ray was in McDonald's. He was a milkshake mixer salesman. And she worked for him then. And then when McDonald's started, she just sort of stayed all the way through. So I was in there every Wednesday. And here's the thing, Mike, that was very interesting as it relates to how it happened. I noticed that June was worth more zeros than I had fingers and toes at this point when I knew her, right? I was 16. And she was very approachable, very nice, never condescending to anyone. She had maids and butlers and, always extra kind, always said hello to me. She knew who I was, at least, as a view, if you will. And we would always, say hello whenever she saw me, and very nice. And that was the first thing that astonished me. I thought, man, I thought rich and successful people were supposed to be jerks, and here's this lady who's very nice and approachable, and just always there to help. I mean, I was actually surprised at how kind she was. And that astonished me. And of course, I loved being in her house, cleaning it. I pulled the Rolls Royce out 3 times to sweep the garage because here's a car that's worth 10 lifetimes of my income, and I'm thinking, this is great. I'm sitting in a Rolls Royce, the real thing. So there was a day when I could tell June was in an extra good mood. So I went up to her, and here's a snot-nosed 16-year-old, yours truly, mustering up all of his courage. I'm going to go ask June Martino, the icon of the area. Everyone knew who June was. I'm going to ask her a question. So I went up to her and I said, June. She said, yes. Again, very nice, always very nice. And I said, can I ask you a question? She goes, sure. I said, could you tell me about it? She said, what? And I said, well, the whole McDonald's thing. I'm not kidding, Mike. She put her arm around me, brought me in the kitchen, and told me the entire story. I asked her in the morning, the entire day. She told me the whole story while we sat in the kitchen. She even had the maids and butlers bringing us food, so she didn't have to stop telling us the story of the whole McDonald's history up until the moment we were sitting in her kitchen. So, I mean, and I'm thinking, my God, this is June Martino, and the June Martino telling me this whole thing to this 16-year-old kid. And she referenced a part in the movie. Again, if any of your listeners saw the movie, there's a part in the movie where June goes to Ray. June Martino goes to Ray Kroc and says, we're out of money. We don't have any money. We have money going out faster than it's coming in. There's nothing in the till. There's nothing there. And Ray ends up calling the partners, and they have an argument because Ray says, I need more interest, I need greater percentages. And again, that's all Hollywood. It isn't exactly the way it happened. Anyway, but the event is true. June told me about it decades earlier. And she said there was a time when Ray couldn't afford to pay me. And so he didn't have any money, so he didn't pay me. He paid me, and we agreed on worthless, less than worthless company stock. And he agreed to take the calls from the bill collectors when they dunned me. And I thought, so I just had to ask her. I said, June, I got to ask you. I said, I'm a janitor. I live paycheck to paycheck. If I don't get paid on Friday, because I get paid Friday and Friday, if I don't get paid on Friday, I'm not showing Saturday. Mm-hmm. And she said, so I asked her, why'd you do it? And I could tell Mike, this snot-nosed 16-year-old had just asked her a question no one else had asked her before. And she sat back, stared at me, but I could tell she left. She was no longer there. No one had asked her why before. They always talked about what happened. No one said, why did it happen? And all I did, I was just curious. And so when she spoke, it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck because the way she said it. When I said, June, why'd you do it? Why'd you work for nothing, no money, and get worthless stock? And her answer to me, Mike, was, because I believed in Ray. And the way she said it, and I remember, Mike, my very first thought, the first thought that came to my mind was, that's it. I've got to find me a Ray Kroc. That's what I need. I need a Ray Kroc. I need someone who can put me under their wing, who can mentor me, teach me, because I have the desire, but I'm the son of a milkman, burnt out janitor who thinks his fun time of a day is getting free songs on a jukebox while I'm cleaning bowling alleys at 2 a.m. I need a Ray Kroc. That's it. And it wasn't 2 or 3 months later, we got a phone call at that same janitorial service, the 2 big events that happened while I worked there. And it was late at night. I'd already punched out. And back then, Mike, they had the clocks, where you punched them out and you felt like really punching them out. Right?
Yeah.
And so I punched out. Yeah, exactly. And there was a big button on the front. You had to nail it, right? These are the really old ones. And I went, ka-ching, made this loud noise. So so I punched out, and I'm talking with the owner of the janitorial service, Jerry, and the phone rings, and it's at nighttime. It's only him and I there. And he hangs up the phone. He said, well, I need someone to go over and show some carpeting. This guy's in from Detroit, and he's opened a diamond store, and he wants someone to show him some carpeting for the store, and he's leaving in the morning. He's got to see it tonight. I said, okay, what's that got to do with me? He said, well, I need you to do it. I said, Jerry, I already punched out. I'm tired. I've been cleaning all day. I'm already punched out. I'm gone. There's nothing. And on top of it, I don't know anything about carpeting. He goes, well, take one of these wheels and walk this way and this way in the room, a measuring wheel. And he said, call me on the phone and I'll quote it for you. And I said, no, Jerry. And I said, no, a second time. I said, no, I'm punched out. He said, I'll tell you what, if you'll go, he said, I have to stay here. He said, if you go, I'll give you your pick off, your day off of any Saturday you want. Now, for a janitor, that's a huge negotiation chip because, as you know, we're cleaning while businesses are closed. So Saturdays, we work all day into the night because companies are closed. We're cleaning, right? So Saturday off is like, whoa, you got to be kidding me. So I repeated it back. I said, any Saturday I want off? And he said, any Saturday. And I said, okay, I'll go. I went back, I punched back in, put some carpet samples in the car, setting the stage now, Mike. I'm going begrudgingly. I'm physically tired, worked all day and into the night. I'm emotionally spent. I don't want to do this thing. There is only one reason I'm going, and that's because of the one Saturday off I get to pick. That's it. Little do I know, I'm getting ready to meet the man that will change the trajectory of my life forever. So I share with your listeners, be observant and be aware of the events in your life that will happen on the thin edge of a dime, that at that moment will seem so insignificant, that will change the course of your life forever. And I met my Ray Kroc, Sam Robbins, who was my business mentor.
And how, so you went, so tell us how that went. So you got your wheel, you've begrudgingly said yes, and only said yes because of the carrot of a Saturday off at your choosing. And I'm thinking your mindset is probably still like, ugh, I have to do this. How long did it take you when you got there to have the revelation that you just described?
Good question. And you nailed exactly how I felt, by the way. I mean, if you were to put an audible tone, it was, that was the audible tone of every part of me as I'm going to meet this gentleman. When I met him, there was an immediate rapport, and I felt like, Mike, that I had already met him before. I don't know if you ever met anyone where you're immediately so comfortable with him, you feel like you're just talking about anything. And we did. We talked for a couple of hours. I showed him the carpeting. None of it was going to work because we only had commercial grade, and he was opening a diamond store. So we wanted something plush, and we just had commercial carpet. So that was out the door, literally. And we talked about all different kinds of things. And as I was leaving, he offers me a job. And I said, yeah, I don't know anything about diamonds. All I know about diamonds is that, number one, they're really expensive. And number two, some lady's going to ask me for one. That's all I know about diamonds. He said, well, I'll teach you. And I said, no. And little did I know at that point, Mike, he was so shrewd. He really was a genius in the truest sense of the word. And he hooked me, and he knew he was hooking me, but I didn't because I was so naive. As I was walking out the door, he said the following, which was going to grind me, and he knew it would. As I'm walking out saying, no, I'm all set. I'm a janitor. My future's all set. He said, what do you have to lose? You can always go back being a janitor. He knew that would get me. And I actually said no and left. And I'm driving home. Now, this is late at night now, approaching midnight. So it's late at night. So I'm driving home, and it's grinding on me. I thought, he's right. People always make a mess. I can always pick it up. I can always clean. I can always go back. I'm a janitor anywhere, any place, nope. All right. I'm going to go find out what he means. So literally, I turned the car around after being halfway home and went back. And to my surprise, he was still there. We're pushing midnight, literally, because he was going to be leaving the next morning, going back to Detroit, right? And I said, okay, what do you have in mind? And he offered me a job. And I could just tell because we had already talked for a couple of hours. I could see, Mike, that this man genuinely, I could tell he was rich. It was pouring out of his pores. And that he was, and I could tell he was very happy. I could just sense that he was truly a happy person. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to be rich and happy, not knowing I had it backwards. We're supposed to be happy first and then rich. But at 16 years old, I wanted to be rich. And then I figured, I'll be happy if I'm rich, right? Not realizing I had it backwards at that point, which he later on taught me I had it backwards. So he offered me a job. And for the next 4 months, Mike, I got in the car at 4 a.m, Friday night, Saturday morning, 4 a.m, drove 301 miles, I'll never forget the mileage, from Chicago to Detroit, had a meeting with him for 6 hours, got back in my car and drove all the way back home, all in the same day, every single weekend for 4 months in a row. And I never missed a weekend because I wanted what he had. And I knew he was my Ray Kroc, and I was going to hang on for dear life. And I asked him, Sam, will you please teach me everything? I don't know. All I know is I want it, but I don't even know exactly what it is. And could you teach me how to become successful and happy? I'm the son of a milkman. I just realized I didn't know what I needed to know, and I needed someone to teach me and just show me. And then I could do it, because I figured if June Martino could do it, you better believe I could. She was a regular person. She wasn't a superhero or an alien. So, that touched in my mind. I had that reference. So I asked Sam, and he said, okay, I'll teach you everything. I won't hold back anything. I'll teach you all of it with one condition. Now, at that point, Mike, by the way, whatever he said next, I was saying yes to. It didn't matter what it was. I was going for a yes, right? And he said, here's what I want from you. When the time is right, and you will know when that time is, I want you to teach as many people as you possibly can everything that I teach you. And I said, absolutely. And that at 19 years old became the vow, the oath, and the commitment I made that later on manifested as Givers University.
Okay. Well, there's a ton of stuff there. Do you mind if we dive in a little bit?
No, and there's literally way more than 2,000 pounds worth.
Yes. Thank you. There are many tons there. Yes. Okay. A gigaton. There we go. So as you were talking about these trips to Detroit or Michigan every weekend for 4 months, and talking to him and listening to him, the hair on my neck sort of stood up a little bit, because it reminded me, although it's not directly the same, it reminded me of Napoleon Hill and Andrew Carnegie. So when Napoleon Hill ended up writing Think and Grow Rich, his mission was to go essentially be a fly on the wall of very successful people, so that he could then package up what it was that he discovered about these people and be able to share it with the world. And I mean, he was an adult when he was doing this, and he did it for, I think, 2 decades before the book came out. But as I was listening to you talk, it reminded me of that kind of a thing, like where you basically gave in to this person that so impressed you that all you wanted to do was be around that person as much as possible. And he to absorb everything, but he was also the wise one who's like, okay, I'm giving this all to you. Yeah, you absorb all of it, but don't you dare hold on to it yourself, right? You got to give this back. Am I nuts with that, or does that?
No, as a matter of fact, one of the things, and I don't want to sound corny to your listeners, but I can share with you the reference that he gave me that has to do with the information. And it started with the word love. He asked me, he said, do you know what love is? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm going to meet a woman and marry her, and we're going to be in love. He goes, I'll give you the definition. I said, okay. He said, love is put in your heart, but not to stay. Love is not love until you give it away. And he said, all the things I'm going to teach you, the wisdom, you have to give it away. Otherwise, it won't be worth anything.
I'm writing that down, till you give it away. That's heavy stuff for a teenager to hear from someone. Couple other things that I noted when you were going through that. First of all, with June, how long was it after you had this discussion with her? Do you remember how long it was before this call came in for you to go and measure for the carpet and meet this?
It was about 2 to 3 months. It wasn't really long.
Okay.
And because it was this, when she told me that thing, and I immediately said, I need to find a Ray Kroc. I remember how intensely I felt it, because it was an instantaneous thought that as soon as she said that, that was the very first next thing that came to my mind was, that's it. That was like the answer. For some reason, in my own mind, in some way, it had been wired. That was the I needed. That was what I was missing. I'm missing a Ray Kroc. Why? That's why June has this and I don't. She had a Ray Kroc. I didn't. I need a Ray Kroc. And so that was my first thought. So it genuinely was maybe 2 or 3 months later, literally out of the blue. Only the owner and I were sitting there that night. But I could have just as easily said, no, Jerry, I'm not going.
Right. Yeah, you could have easily. You tried to say that.
I said it. I said no
Yeah.
twice. I was literally trying to talk my way out of it. And then little did I know, and that's why I share with your listeners, don't pass up any opportunity when you don't know where it's going to play out and how it's going to play out. So that's one of the things we teach is discernment. We teach discernment, something that's not being taught anywhere today.
Well, that's another thing I wrote down. Yes. So you reluctantly said yes. You tried multiple times to say no to this. But then after you said yes, and after you met Sam, and after his impact resonated with you, you said yes all the time. Right. So I actually want to get your viewpoint on this, because nowadays, and maybe it's not nowadays, I hate saying nowadays, it makes me sound like I know something that other people don't know, but it seems like now people may not be as anxious to say yes to something because they are looking at what could go wrong with the yes as opposed to what could go right with the yes. And then you also have people, more established people on podcasts and for example, famous people saying, I'm very protective of my time and I only say yes to things that, they might say it's something that I could say hell yes to, I'll say yes to it. If I can't, I'll say no. And I always think to myself, and I want to hear what you have to say. I always think to myself, I don't know. I never know whether saying no is the right thing until I learn a little bit more about what saying yes could mean to me. But I'm curious how you think and process that whole yes thing.
All right, very much so. And first, to digress for a moment, I appreciate when you say nowadays, because I know that when I listen to something on the radio and I know all the words to the song, and then the host of the show comes on and says, well, we hope you enjoyed our time with the golden oldies. And I thought, when did I become a golden oldie? So I got nowadays big time. I know exactly how that works. Oh, man. So one of the things we teach, and it really is right to your answer as we talk about givers and takers, because it really is. It's the heart of what the answer to that question is the heart of that. We teach something that simply is not being taught anywhere else. It's just that simple. Today, Mike, I know, and your listeners know, businesses are opening and closing faster than ever before. Products are being antiquated overnight. And we're moving so fast. All we have left is our relationships. And no one's teaching us how to discern those relationships. So what we do, and I wouldn't entirely 1,000% agree with the reference of the gentleman you were making about, unless I could say, hell yes. I mean, I'm sure, he has his reasons and et cetera. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that for the reasons I'm about ready to share with your listeners. Mm-hmm. First of all, I want to mention your listeners, we love everybody. I say that emphatically. We love everybody, but we teach people how to separate the person who we love from their deeds, which we may not love. We teach people how to separate that, and then what to look for, not broad swaths of innocuous information that when you hear it, you go, oh, that sounds really good, but what do I do with that? We actually teach people, these are the things to look for, the actual deeds. When you see them doing these things, look for these deeds. The example I'd give you, Mike, is if right now you had itchy eyes and a runny nose, I could probably guess you have a cold. I'm not able to see the cold, but I know the cold is the cause, and I can see you have a cold by virtue of observing the symptoms. We teach people, look at these symptoms, and when you see, we even give them checklists. Here's the 6 arrows that takers shoot at givers all the time, the 6 arrows of their quiver. Here's the 25 do's, the 25 things givers do. Here's the 25 things takers do. And these will help you discern, should I bring this person closer in my life? That would mean they're a giver, and givers bring with them the 3 W's of wisdom, wealth, and wellness. We want to bring those people in closer. Or should I be respectfully distancing myself, not nasty or rude or insensitive, respectfully distancing myself, because takers bring with them the 3 D's of a taker, which is defeatism, disruption and destruction. So I ask your listeners, think about the fires that you stomp out every day. Think about when your stress level spikes throughout the day. Think about the times you have conversations with people, and at the end of the conversation, you barely remember what you talked about, but you do know you have no energy left. They just drained it all out of you.
Right.
All of those three things, Mike, have one thing in common. There's a name attached to them. And no one today is teaching us how to discern who should we have in our life. I'm a self-improvement guy. I'm positive you're a self-improvement guy, but no one's teaching us, how about the other guy? What if he's not doing it right? What do we do then?
Mm-hmm.
So no one's teaching people how to discern who should we pull in our lives. I talked with a gentleman yesterday, and he says, that's right. He said, I was saying the same thing. And he said, yeah, there's a book written about, we should have, who are your 5 people you want to have in your life? And I said, that's great. How do you know which are the 5? And he stared at me with this blank look. And I said, that's my point. And no one's teaching us how to discern what's the details we look for, the things they do that help us discern who are the givers and who are the takers in our life. So when and one of the things my business mentor taught me, to the point of what that other gentleman said to you, unless you say, hell yes, right? He said the following: when you're a giver, people will take advantage of you. Expect it. But you are never diminished because they did.
It's on them.
You are never diminished. He said, they lose. He said, they lost the relationship. They lost you. And he said, and here's the part, as he taught me about what's called the law of compensation. He said, the law of compensation is constantly striving to be in balance. He said, so the fact that you gave to them, remember, number one, you're never diminished. So you don't have to be afraid and protective. To your point, to your question, you don't have to be protective and afraid of that, because that's going to come back to you from another business, another person, another entity. You will get that back, because the law of compensation, not sometimes, not 10%, 100% of the time will strive for balance. So in that scale, we want to be the investment part, because here's the rewards part. The investment part, we want to be loading that up all the time and doing our best to get that scale out of balance, because it's going to bring itself back into balance with our rewards all of the time. So I would love to have a vigorous conversation with a gentleman who says, hell yes, because like I say, I could share you times in my life where I compelled businesses to do business with me because I invested so heavily in them. They almost felt morally obligated to do business with me.
Right.
So that's the difference between givers and takers.
So I want to get into that more. But first when did you start Givers University, or when did it begin?
Well, in its seed form as an oath, obviously I was 19 years old with the oath and vow I mentioned. In 1991 is when we first started. Actually, that was when the first name came up of Givers University, and said, we need to, what's going to be a mechanism that someday, as I began to compile all this and my, 3 temporary defeats in life, each one caused me to write a book. So I'd never be in that position again. And those became, by the way, the sifting of that. Also, I had a radio talk show, and I was I interviewed 3 millionaires every hour for 5 nights a week for 2 years solid. So I interviewed over 1,000 millionaires in 2 years on a radio talk show I had back in 91. And so the information I gleaned from them and from my business mentor then compiled into this series of 3 courses, which is the cornerstone of Givers University, called Give to Be Great. And then that caused this all. So 91 was really about the time where the name happened. And that began the slow, arduous process through decades to finally get to this point, because one of the things, my commitment and my vow to my mentor, Mike, was, he said, you'll know when the time is right. And there's never been a better time to teach discernment than today, because it's not being taught anywhere. No one's being taught, how do I discern who I should pull in close and who I should be respectfully distancing in my life so that my productivity can go up instead of down.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So that's 30 years, 1991. We're recording this in 2021. So that leaves a period of time for you personally between 19-ish and 35, give or take. You've got this oath that Sam planted in this, the seed for which Sam planted in your head at age 19. Take us through 19 to 35. What did you do? And then what was that thing that occurred that made you take the more formal action and start Givers University?
Well, okay, great. That's a great detailed question. The first thing, and it has to do basically with what I call my three temporary defeats. And as my business mentor said, he said, never use the word failure. He said, failure sounds eternal. It's got an eternal feel to it. He said, don't even use the word, eliminate it from your vocabulary. Use temporary defeat. And here's why. Every adversity, this is right to Napoleon Hill, every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. Not some, not a few of them, all of them. He said, and when our wisdom grows, we begin to realize, and then we start to welcome and embrace a temporary defeat because we realize what's happening. He said, when you get tackled, when you stand up, you'll realize you got a first down. You're still in the game. You weren't thrown out of the game. He said, so don't throw yourself out of the game. That's what people do. So through the course of this, after with the diamond business, we were very, very prosperous with that. And then I decided that I wanted to do some training and started a training company with a separate gentleman while I was still being mentored by my business mentor. And I started a training company, and I was in my early 20s at this point. And the company was doing great. We were out of Berkeley, Illinois. And it was very, very successful. We had multiple offices, training other companies on how to grow.
Who was that person you started that business with?
His name was Jim Duncan.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, and so Jim and I, started that business, and he had 50% and I had 50%. And it led to my first major temporary defeat and caused me to write the first major book, hopefully, of course, so I wouldn't ever be there again. Thank God I was being mentored at the same time. So it was a training company as we were training different businesses. And when I reference someone, I usually don't like to give out their last names too much because it's sort of really no one's business, because I'm not necessarily speaking positive what someone did. But also I'll just reference him as Jim.
Okay.
Stories, etc.
Again, just tell me it's none of my business.
Yeah, in all deference to them, really.
I mean, sure, of course,
yeah, for sure. So Jim and I we had very successful business, multiple offices, doing great. Now back in the day, not nowadays.
Oh boy.
Back in the day, there was a machine that sat on the desk, and you'll remember this, Mike, and it was called a voice answering machine. It was a machine. And on one side it had a cassette tape that you recorded your outgoing message when people called you. And on the other side was a cassette tape. And these were cassette tapes about this big for those that may see this visually. They were real McCoy cassette tapes. On the right side was a 60-minute tape that would keep recording because my machine was voice actuated. As long as someone talked, it would keep recording. So I left home for about an hour and a half. I came back from home, and I was only gone an hour and a half. And the whole tape, the 60-minute tape, was used up. Oh, this is crazy. I said, some kids got a hold of it because that had happened before. When they realized it would keep recording, they would play on it, right? So some kids record. So I'm rewinding it. Boy, was I in for a shocker. So as I played back the message, I could hear my business partner, not my mentor, my business partner was leaving me a message. And it was only a few seconds just to call him back. And back then, when you were talking to someone on the phone, if someone was calling in, there was a tone in the background that let you know someone's calling in. Went beep, beep.
Call waiting.
Yeah, exactly. It's what he had, call waiting and call conferencing. So what he did inadvertently was I could hear the tone in the background while he was leaving the message on my recorder. I could hear it. He hit his receiver so fast, he put my machine on call recording with him and someone else, and I wasn't even home. It recorded the whole conversation. I wasn't even home. So here's the thing. The phone call contained the step-by-step plan they had to take over the company and kick me out of it, even though I was a 50% owner. It was extraordinary. I couldn't believe what I just heard. And let me tell you, Mike, when you hear it in someone's own voice, it's way different than third party. I'm hearing it in his own words. I mean, this is just, this is not, there's nothing deniable here or misconstrued. And I think back now, what are the odds of that? First of all, Jim could have called me when I was home. I would have picked up the phone. No, he called me when I was gone. When he called me, that other guy didn't have to call right then. No, he called right then. And by the way, when they talked, they could have talked about golf. No, it was that exact conversation going over the plan step by step, which was almost exactly a 60-minute conversation.
Oh my gosh.
Mind-blowing, mind-boggling. Yeah. I thought, I just can't believe this. I listened to it again. I was so blindsided because I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know what to discern. I was learning it, but I hadn't been taught it. So as a result of this, I thought, man, what am I going to do? Well, I've got to reach into my training that my business mentor is training me. And one of the things he trained me on, Mike, was never allow your emotions to rule your intellect. When you do, you're reacting and you don't want to be there. Be responsive. And you're responsive when your intellect is controlling your emotions. And I remember the example he gave me. He said, in the medical community, if you're getting a treatment, if they say he's reacting to it, that's not good, right? He's not doing good on the treatment. If he's responding to the treatment, he's doing good. He's doing better. So he said, you always want to be in responsive mode, not reaction mode. So always make sure your intellect is controlling your emotions and you will be in responsive mode. Now, let me tell you, this was not an easy task at this point. I was in an emotional upheaval, to say the least. And I was grappling for my training on how do I get my mind around this and control this. So,
and EA, was this completely out of the blue when you heard this? This thought had never been broached.
It was out of every color on top of blue. I mean, it was a true, literal 100% blindside.
Just a punch in the guts. Yeah. Okay.
Out of nowhere. And then, in the actual words, that's what, I mean, there wasn't the scuttlebutt. It wasn't a rumor, I'm hearing the plan step by step, which is what was so mind blowing. So sleepless night. And I reached into my training and I said, okay. So the next day I told Jim, I said, Jim, you need to buy me out. I said, we have 7 days to do this. We need an agreement. We need to make it now. I said, I'm doing something else for my business mentor, which I had intended on, I wanted to do anyway. And I said, we have 7 days. So we did reach an agreement. I got a couple of monthly payments from him. And I thought every one of them was a gift because I already knew what kind of person he was. I didn't even expect the payments, right? But here's what's interesting about that. Because I reached into my training, because I had a mentor, which I recommend for every one of your listeners, have a mentor and listen to them, but make sure they're the right person and you've discerned up front. Because I listened to my mentor and my training, I saw Jim about a year later at an amusement park, and it was far enough. I mean, I knew who he was. He was my partner. I knew what he looked like, right? He didn't see me. He just didn't see me because of where we were standing, but I knew it was him. There was no question. And I had already heard in 12 months, he'd filed for personal bankruptcy, business bankruptcy. He'd gotten divorced. And as I'm looking at him, it looked like he had aged 20 years. And that same 12 months, Mike, my income was 100% up over the previous 12 months with him. And that caused me to write what's called the Giver's Mindset. That's the first course in Givers University. And that is how a giver thinks differently than a taker. They're wired differently. They think differently. And when we say the word giver, by the way, we're not labeling a person. We're labeling the deeds of that person. Remember, I said we separate that. Same with a taker. When we say taker, we're not labeling a person a taker. We're labeling the deeds of that person as a taker. So the mindset, how does a giver think? So in that course is the 6 arrows that takers shoot at givers all the time. And I can give actually some of your listeners a couple of the arrows just as a quick reference to give them some good nuggets, because I like to share some really good information, meaty information with people as well. And then a couple of days later, we're going to give them the 25 do's. It's a 2-page checklist of the actual do's. These are the deeds to look for. Print it off, put it in your pocket, walk around with it, because when they look around with it, they go, inevitably, when they see it, they go, oh, this so needs to be taught. No one's teaching us how to discern who we should pull in close and who we should respectfully distance because of how they will impact our life as a direct result.
Well, yeah, let's share some of those. But first, I want to ask you, how did you know which ones were the right ones? How did you know this? You've used this word discern many, many times, and I understand what discern means, but putting a definition or sort of a concrete definition around an observation is sometimes tricky.
Exactly right. So hence the example I gave you of the cold and the symptom. We use the way to discern, not discernment as a definition, but the way to discern through the deeds, the symptoms. Look at the actual deeds the person is doing, right? As an example, 2 of the 6 arrows, and we're going to give these. We want your listeners to have them free. We're Givers University. That's what we do, right? We're going to give it. We want to give away quality things to people to help them. So there are 6 primary arrows that takers love to shoot at givers. And most people don't even realize they're getting hit. They're walking around bleeding all day and they don't realize because no one's taught them. This is a skill set to observe. Using the example, it's like when you're getting ready to buy a green car, all of a sudden you realize how many green cars are on the street.
Right.
The green cars were always there.
Right.
We were just, our attention and awareness wasn't focused on the green cars. Now it is. So we put people's attention and focus on something that's already present and show them how to discern the color green, right? How to look at those symptoms and look for these. And out of the 25 do's, when you see someone at 13 of those do's on one side or the other, you can start to discern, okay, they're being a little bit takerish. I need to be thinking about maybe respectfully distancing myself because their deeds are showing. And as we say, the following: your talk talks and your walk talks, but your walk talks louder than your talk talks.
Okay, I got it.
Our deeds speak louder than our words. So a couple of the arrows to give to your listeners. One of the things that takers will do is they will switch. You will see them in conversation switch from a fact-based, moral high ground, non-emotional conversation into a highly emotional, low ground, personal attacks. You'll see them switch the conversation into, and by clear references such as, you don't know what you're talking about. Remember, you don't know what you're talking about. It's an attack. You don't know about the subject. You don't know what you're talking. You don't know me, right? So one of the things a taker can do, and you will watch them do it, their deeds, they will switch gears. And when they do, you can know right then they just got revealed. They will switch gears from a fact-based, high moral ground conversation into a highly emotionally charged personal attacks because they have nothing they can base it on. So a taker will go into personal attack mode. A giver won't do that. They will stay on point. Right? Another arrow that you will see is a taker will attempt to feebly transfer their guilt, their taker guilt, onto the giver by saying things like, you made me angry. You made me do it. And interestingly enough, Mike, that statement isn't even accurate. You can't make someone else angry. They can allow you to make them angry. We have the choice to accept that or not. Most people just automatically just allow people to make them angry and they fly off the handle because their emotions are ruling their intellect and they're reacting instead of responding. So the statement itself, first of all, is not accurate to begin with. When you say, you made me do it. But when you see them transfer guilt by reference of deeds, or the deed itself is a reference, they're saying, you made me do this, right? You made me angry. Besides, it's not accurate. It's also an arrow. It's a personal attack. So we teach people, and when they start to discern, now they're getting a skill set that puts them ahead above everyone else, because so many people are, people say givers and takers. And like you said at the beginning of our podcast, people know the reference in the general terms, but no one says, how do we discern that? What should we be looking for? I became a commercial pilot to fly my own planes in years past. And one of the first things my instructor, when I was becoming a private pilot, said, look out the window of the aircraft. And when you see a plane go from this size to this size real fast, get concerned.
Yeah, that's a bad sign. Yes.
He said, because it's coming at you and the closure rate may be 600 miles an hour. He said, you need to do something about it. I said, what you want to see is a plane be that big. And then as time goes on, it gets like that. Here's what we teach, Mike. We teach people how to look at the plane when it's at a distance and see, is it coming at me? And should I be respectfully distancing myself before it becomes a problem so you don't have to bail it out, stomping out fires all the time? Take care of it before it happens through good discernment.
Okay, so you got my attention there. I want to explore this a little bit more because there are a lot of, in my experience, people that I would term to be takers are often very good at either one, being takers when the answering machine's not on, in other words, not in front of you. So they present in a way where you're like, feels and looks like a giver. And then when you're away, is when they become takers. How is it? I mean, I'm sure, do you agree with there's people who are very good at being that kind of taker, I guess. And I'm wondering how the discernment process works to get to that. Because it feels like it's easier if it does like what you said, where they say, you made me feel, you did this, you did this, you did that. Right. But like Jim, if you hadn't intercepted that message, if you hadn't discerned that Jim was that type of person.
Yeah, for sure. Great question. And we've actually statistically proven that 20% of the population are givers. That means you put 20% of the population in any situation, doesn't matter what it is, they're going to, in a short period of time, begin giving, contributing, investing, helping. They're going to always be the first one to step forward. They're wired that way. That's what they do. By contrast, the other Grand Canyon extreme, 20% are also takers. These are people who in a short period of time will begin to craft a way to begin to take morally, spiritually, mentally, financially, emotionally, the list goes on and on. Now that's 20 and 20, that's 40. What about, well, there's 60% left. Those 60% are what we call fencers, to your point, Mike. They sit on the fence. They act like givers when they're with givers, and they act like takers when they're with takers. They can be great relationships, but you need to manage those relationships and you need to keep an eye on them because you don't know which side of the fence they're on, they switch. Right. So what we want to do is through discernment, we learn to look for those people and discern the deeds of those people we should pull in close that we don't have to manage because we know how they're going to be. They're wired that way, right? And one of the best things they can do. So let's say, Mike, someone in your listening audience has someone they care about, because the things we teach in discernment are used in the family, they're used in business, they're used socially across the board. Let's say one of your listeners has someone they love. They really care about them, but they can tell lately they're being a little takerish. What do? How do you broach the subject with them? Because you don't want to hurt their feelings. You love them. You care about them, right?
Well, plus you may feel obligated to them if they're family members or business colleagues.
For sure. So how do you broach it? One of the very best things they could do, Mike, is share a podcast with them called How Did It Happen? Now, the reason I say that is as follows. What are we talking about right now? This is a great third-party reference or a great way to broach a subject with someone else who's maybe being a little takerish by simply saying the following. You know what? I heard this really thought-provoking podcast, and they covered something that's really different. I never heard it before. And the way that it's being talked about is something that's not being taught anywhere. And it really made me think. I really enjoyed it. You should listen to it and give me your opinion. Now, by doing that, by sharing how did it happen with them, what they're really doing is using a third party, you and I, Mike, as a way to broach that subject that may cause their mind to open. And the giver of the podcast who shared it may be the beneficiary, because now they may have one less fire they're stomping out because everything that we teach at Givers University, there's a self-assessment part built in automatically. So when someone's thinking in terms, and this other person in the family, by the way, that's being a little takerish, who knows? They may have a bunch of takers around them and they don't even realize it. And now they start discerning. And because of that, their life gets better and the original person benefits. So first things first, Mike, they should share this podcast, How Did It Happen, with everyone they know, and especially those who maybe they care about and are being a little bit takerish.
Well, that's great advice, by the way, EA. Thank you for that. You should share this podcast.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But as you were talking, I was thinking about a couple things. One, you're what you said about, think about them and who they're surrounded with. You do become, or you can easily become, I shouldn't say you do become because it's a choice, but you can easily become what you are around and not even realize it. So if you're around good influences, you can become a good influencer. If you're around negative influencers, you can become a negative influencer and not even realize that you're one or the other, I suppose. But I was thinking on the because this has happened to me, so I want to get your opinion on it. So say I said to somebody, "Oh, you should listen to this podcast." How did it happen? I like in my own experience, I've found that some people don't get subtle references about them. Like they'll listen to it and go, "Oh, yeah, that was really cool. Takers are really, bad," but they don't see them. It doesn't occur to them that the reason you sent them there was a subtle message that maybe, just maybe, you might be a taker. How do you? So has that been your experience as well, or you've got a way to?
There's certainly instances of that, and I would use the reference of a person changed against their will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
So what happens is they're not ready and they haven't been gone to the woodshed yet, and they got the awakening that may be necessary for them to realize it. But one of the best things we have found is simply sharing with them your personal experience and transformation of what you're learning, that somehow through consistent water dripping on the stone that ultimately causes the stone to break. By sharing with them, you know what, I started learning about this stuff, and I realized, and all of a sudden I started realizing I started being happier when I had the right people around me. And this is what happened in my life. So through the strength of, as the saying goes, we cannot have a testimony until we've had a test. And test is the first part of it. So what we need to do is share with others our test and how we transformed and how we learned. And then they start saying, maybe some of the people I have around me aren't the ones I should, because I can tell they're not the smiling sort. And, they don't build up people. They work really hard at, tearing people down. So the self-assessment part starts to come in through the power of our own transformation story of how it helped us. That's why I share my 3 major defeats, with my 3 major temporary defeats with people all through the courses. I'm brutally transparent. Someone wants to read about them, take the course, you'll learn all about them. And I'm brutal and going through, just like I did with Jim's story, and the things that happen and how they happen and the inner workings and what I learned from those, because then people can relate to that story and that causes them to want to make that change and get the ultimate transformation of being more productive, not having to stamp out fires, having the right people around us because we feel charged and we're charging each other rather than having energy drainers around us all day.
And how do you teach or encourage people once they've identified the takers in their life to approach the conversation about not wanting that taker to be around them any longer?
Sometimes, and I have had the conversation when the last straw is on the camel's back. Sometimes you need to have a kind, loving, pointed conversation and simply say, I want you to know, number one, I love you. I care about you. You're very important in my life, and I want you in my life more. but I can share with you that because of all the events and things that happen, here's things that I have learned that I'm changing about myself. And I'm realizing that some of these things are coming into my life because of challenges you have. I want you in my life more, but I'm going to need to ask that we need to take a look and examine some of these things here, as I have done with myself. So first of all, you're putting yourself first, that you are changing yourself, right? And then you're saying, as a part of me changing myself, I want to have you more in my life, but I want to let you know, you and I are going to see the opposite happening if there isn't a change forthcoming, because I knew I needed a change in me. And I hope and pray that you see the same thing. And I want you in my life more, but we need to have a change here. And here's a great roadmap for us to do that.
Yeah. And so in that example, you're taking the responsibility for, you're not doing what a taker does and saying, I can't have you because you make me whatever. You say, I'm responsible for the way our relationship has developed. And because of that, and because of where I want to go, I need to change that. I'm just putting that, maybe that's not the greatest way to say it, but I'm just thinking I like the way you put that, where I'm not going to do what a taker does to get rid of a taker. I'm going to be a giver, take responsibility, because you're in my life because I let you be in here, right? You didn't, like, I'm not a slave to you. You didn't enslave me. I let you. It was a decision on my part to welcome you in, and now I need to make a different decision to welcome you out, something along those lines.
And it's a whole lot easier as we learn this and we learn the skill set. Now we can watch the plane and observe it from a distance, and then they never get close enough to where we have to clean it up. So that's part of it. We have the one situation of those, we're static. Where are we right now? We've got to take a look at that. But then there's also down the road, what are the actions we can take so that we're not in that situation again? And I just want to let you know, what a pleasure it's been to be on your podcast. And can I share with your listeners how they can get in touch with us?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
We actually have a quiz, and the name of the quiz is, what is your givers and takers awareness IQ? What is your givers and takers awareness IQ? It's a 7-question quiz, and literally 4 minutes or less, multiple choice, super easy to do, fun, and also very insightful. And each one, it's absolutely free. All the listeners, we want them to go to the URL and do the quiz. It's at givers, plural, giversuniversity.info, INFO, giversuniversity.info. When they go there, they're actually on the first page. They're on the first question. As soon as they go there, they're on the first question already. 4 minutes later, they're going to be done. They will get an assessment based on their answers. There's different assessments. Within minutes afterwards, we're going to email them, Mike, the 6 arrows.
Okay.
So that they can get that and print it off. Within a couple of days later, we're going to send them the 25 do's. It's a 2-page checklist that is so excellent and clear, that's going to help and impact their life. And because there's a self-assessment built in, each one of us benefit with this, along with our discernment. Part of our discernment is also discerning our own deeds too, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
So as a result of that, so we are going to invest in them, and that starts the relationship. And from that, they learn about our courses, they learn about our offerings, and we're very much nurturers and helpers and investors. And we love to be able to share with other people's in their lives and help them, because we know the word spreads. And I just want to thank you, what a great podcast to have a name of, how did it happen? And you know what also can happen? The rest of that could be, how did it happen that I became a taker? Because, what we could do is share with people how easy it can be. When we were kids, Mike, I remember there was an old game that when you hung out with someone a long time, before you know it, you both would start saying something at the same time. And we used to have a phrase called, owe me a Coke. You owe me a Coke. If you said it the same way. How did that happen? Why did you do that? Why do we say that at the same time? We teach what's called the spirit of harmony. And there's a spirit of harmony within givers, and there's a spirit of harmonies within takers. And we talk and we teach and discern how others influence our spirit of harmony around us, whether they be givers or takers, and how we want to have a spirit of harmony of givers around us, our giver community. We teach people about these things. Their awareness goes up. their productivity and their productivity goes up, stress level goes down, and now they're around energy givers that are giving them energy and they're recharging all the time. So go to giversuniversity.info, do the quiz. It's 4 minutes, absolutely free. And we want to load you up with some of these great checklists that you can use as immediate tools, and you can use them in all parts, family, business, and social in your life. And Mike, you are an awesome host.
Well, thank
you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, EA. This has been fantastic. I've learned a ton, and thank you for sharing the stories of June and Sam and Jim and these other people, because those really brought home where your thinking came from on this, and it's really extraordinary. I appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me on. And I hope all your listeners share your podcast, because they're going to be helping a lot of other people by being a giver.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.